Really excited to be presenting to you today. We are going to be running these webinars once a month and are hoping to pass on some really useful information in relation to the market, how we're finding things, how rents are performing, and giving a bit of an insight onto supply versus demand, as well as any sort of legislation updates that have come in through the last month. The agenda for today's webinar. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction about myself and give you a quick insight into ERE. Then go into detail about the market, how it performed through August and what sort of trends we're finding. Provide a bit more information on rent arrears, possession and hearing updates and how the courts are holding up at the moment. As well as some changes that came into play last month with regards to right to rent. And we'll finish with a Q&A session. So the questions that we've got on there are questions that people have posted when they were registering. There are a couple on there that are sort of quite detailed, and answers will sort of be determined by individual circumstances. With the webinar as a whole, there are some topics in there that we will give sort of just a general overview and a bit of a sort of whole market view on. So if at any time you do have any further questions, if you want to discuss something in more detail in a little bit more, that's a bit more specific to your circumstances, at the top of the screen, there's a button where you can book a follow-up call with our business development manager, Christian McClory. Christian's been in the industry for sort of 5-6 years. He heads up our BD team here, and he's responsible for new landlords and new business. But he's really well placed to have that conversation with you and to give any details, any information that might be a little bit more sort of challenging in regards to your situation. So for those that aren't sort of current ERE clients, my name is Chris Stone. I'm the business director at ERE Property. I've been in the industry for over 12 years. 5 years of those have been at sort of senior management level with ERE and 2 of the large corporates. I'm ALA qualified, so we do get a lot of information sort of comes to us through ALA before it finds its way out in the mainstream press. So we are fortunate enough to sort of be able to pass on information before it gets into the media and make sure that our clients are really well informed. And know about everything that's going off before it's too late, really. So ERE, we're a property investment firm, been trading for 17 years. We've got 4 offices, 3 of which are located in the UK, 1 in Leeds, 1 in Liverpool and 1 in Manchester. We do have an office over in Hong Kong as well, which is headed up by one of our co-founders, Robert Med. There's 2 arms to the business, so ERE Property, that's been trading for the 17 years. It's our property sort of consultancy investment firm. So we offer off-plan developments throughout the UK, sort of mainly in the northern powerhouse areas to investors. And then the lettings business, which has been trading for about 5 years, just under 5 years, got just under 1,000 units. And we are fortunate enough, the structure of the business allows us to be able to let and manage any property in England. So we can go from the Scottish borders all the way down to the south coast, from the Welsh borders over to the east coast and everything in between. So we'll start by looking at the market. A lot of the figures that we used in here, they come from the Zoopla report, so Zoopla and Home Track, which we find to be one of the most sort of informative and detailed reports that are out there. They do work a month and a bit in arrears. So the figures that we'll be using today are based up to the end of July. But they do provide a really good insight into how the market's performed over the last sort of 12-month period. So we'll start with rental growth, and that's showing some really encouraging signs at the moment. So average rents outside of London rose by 5% over the last 12-month period. That's the largest increase that the Zoopla report has seen since it actually started in 2008. There were a few areas that performed particularly well, and 4 sort of regions saw 10-year highs being delivered. So the East Midlands, their rents over in the East Midlands, they've increased by 6.8% over the last 12 months. The Northeast is an area that's been seeing growth for a while, 6.5% over there. Southwest saw 7.6%, and the Yorkshire and Humber region saw growth of 4.9%. So the average rent outside of London now sits at sort of £790 a calendar month, and that's up from about £738 this time last year. So what's the reason behind the growth? Well, there's a few things. Clearly, the market's been suppressed over the last 12 months with COVID lockdowns having an impact. People being less inclined to move over the last sort of 12 months now that the lockdown restrictions have been lifted. People are putting the plans back in, putting wheels back in motion on the plans that they had. But there's more at play than that. The 2017, the government started to try and make the market more appealing to what they classed as professional landlords. So landlords who were trying to build a portfolio for the longer term. And they started with changes to mortgage rate interest relief and how that was claimed through tax. That sort of started in 2017, and in 2020 they scrapped that completely. And 2019 saw the tenant fee ban come into play. Now, a lot of comments from the industry when this came out was that ultimately it was going to have the opposite effect to what the government were trying to achieve. So the ultimate aim with any sort of legislation that the government introduces normally to make the experience of a tenant more enjoyable or safer. And in this instance, that's what they've been trying to do, trying to get the more professional landlord, somebody who's got 2 or 3 properties in their portfolio, and their view is to hold them for a longer term, as opposed to the accidental landlord, somebody who may have inherited a property, sort of gone into a relationship, had a second property that they then chose to rent out, or somebody who may have gone to rent and held a property in where they originally lived. The reality is in the eyes of a lot of people in the industry, the complete opposite has been achieved. The fees that were being charged by tenants by letting agents were no longer able to do that, and they were passed on to landlords through, in a lot of cases, management fee increase. Some agents reported losing as much as a third of their income overnight. It was always going to be that those increased fees were going to be recovered from landlords by increased rents. And that's what we're seeing now. A lot of these increases are landlords passing on some of these increased legislative charges to tenants, and that's seeing the rent increase that we are now seeing. The second and sort of more pressing reason as to why we're seeing these increases comes down to supply versus demand. At the moment, there is a huge increase in the amount of people that are looking for a rental property. That's 19% through 2020 and 2021 so far, but supply's down by 13%. Agreed lets are up by 8%. So as you can see, more people are looking for rental properties, less people are renting properties, and what we're seeing in the market is in the first time ever in rentals is people trying to gazump, something that's seen in the sale market where offers are being increased, rents are being pushed up, and somebody's offering more to secure a property that they are interested in. Average time to rent is at a 5-year low. So the time between a tenant moving out and a tenant moving in across the industry now sits at 15 days. And what we're seeing at the moment, and something that we'll touch on in one of the questions later, if you have a property that's not renting, the reality is it's either not being presented properly or the price point's wrong. So in terms of we covered regions. There has been a return to city life and city living. That's been a little bit more delayed. What we saw is that the towns outside of the cities and the more rural locations, they saw they saw the demand and the increases come before the cities did. But what we are seeing now is that the cities are starting to swing back. We've seen huge growth in the amount of inquiries we've received into our Leeds, our Liverpool, and our Manchester branches. So, how are these cities performing versus the regions? So, Birmingham over the last 12 months has seen a 3.3% increase in rent. Leeds 1.4%, Liverpool 5.8%, and Manchester 1.8%. So as you can see at the moment, they're sitting quite a little bit lower than the regional increase, but the trends that we're seeing are that we expect those to keep going, and we expect those areas to overtake some of the outskirts and the towns that they are at the moment competing with. So possessions, hearings, how are the courts holding up? So what we are sort of seeing, and what we'll start with is a bit of an overview of the changes that we've seen over the last year. So obviously the pandemic and the restrictions that have come with that have seen challenges across the rental market. So this all started on the 26th of March 2020 when the government came out and advised that no fault evictions were being sort of changed. So 3 months notice was required if you wanted to recover your property. The 29th of August 2020, 6 months notice was required for any landlord who wanted to recover their property. The exception to that was that they would allow 4 weeks notice in severe and pressing cases. So the main one being rent arrears. And in that instance, the notice period was reduced from 6 months to 4 weeks, but you had to have a tenant who had either 6 months or more worth of rent outstanding. 1st of June 2021, 4 months notice was required, and the 4 weeks for cases was reduced to 4 months worth of rent outstanding. On the 1st of August 2021 this year, the 4 months was reduced to 2 months, but the 4 weeks, the reduced notice period, did remain at 4 months rent outstanding. Sort of hot off the press, latest news from back end of last week is that the government have confirmed their intention to return to normal from the 1st of August. So notice periods are going to return to those pre-COVID levels and pre-COVID timeframes from the 1st of August. They are sort of set at Section 21, so what the government and what the industry classes as no fault evictions. So if someone's recovering their property due to wanting to sell it or move back into it, may not necessarily have a tenant in there who's not paying rent or causing any sort of problems, that's going to return at the 2 months notice that was in prior to the COVID restrictions coming in. Section 8, so the sort of at fault notices, so that's there for antisocial behaviour, it's there for rent arrears, it's there for a number of other reasons, mortgage companies wanting to recover it, etc. That's going to return to the levels sort of prior to March last year. Now that one does vary. The amount of notice can vary dependent on the reason that you're wanting to serve notice. The most common reason that anyone would serve a Section 8 notice is rent arrears. So you've got a tenant who's sort of 2 months or more behind with their rent, and that will return to 4 weeks notice. It's worth remembering Section 21 notices. If you've got a tenant in a fixed term, you must make sure that the notice is for a minimum of 2 months notice and does not expire before the end of the fixed term. It can't be served until at least 4 months from the beginning of the tenancy have passed. And you need to have made sure that all your deregulation documents have been covered off with the tenant at the outset. So your energy performance certificates, how to rent guide, prescribed information for your deposits, EPM and gas safety records were all served at the outset. Section 8, that can be served during a fixed term. So if a tenant's been in there for 2 months and fails to pay the first or second month's rent, you can serve that straight away. and that's for 4 weeks' notice, allowing a couple of days for service. Now, there are a few things that are going to be different to sort of these processes that we are used to from sort of early 2020. It's likely to be that the judges are going to continue to request information on any arrears that may have built up during the pandemic. So if you've got a tenant who's been a good tenant prior to March last year, never had any rental issues, and got into arrears through sort of Q2, 3, or 4 of last year, they are likely to take that into account when making a decision. At this precise moment in time, we don't know necessarily how that's going to impact. It may be that tenants are given a longer sort of notice, a longer judgment by the courts to move, or it may be that they're taken into account in other ways. Enforcement and action has been reintroduced, so there's a period of last year where you could go to court, and you could get a county court judgment and a judge ruling to remove a tenant. However, if that tenant didn't remove and you went to a bailiff, they were instructed not to remove anybody from the properties. That's now been scrapped, and enforcement action has been reintroduced. It is worth pointing out that the sentiment in the industry and what a lot of the agents are finding and reporting, as well as what a lot of courts are showing, is that actually through last year arrears reduced. And it was clear that landlords were put into a position where they had to work with their tenants. Court action was only on the table if you had a tenant who was at 6+ months of arrears. So clearly everybody wanted to avoid that if they possibly could. We found that whilst we have had cases going through court, actually our arrears at the moment are lower than they were sort of December 2019, March 2020. And that's been through tenants being more open in the discussions with the landlords, and in return landlords being more open to working with tenants. What we are also expecting is that what was introduced last year was a pre-court hearing. So cases would be put in front of a specialist tenancy or property judge who would assess the case. They'd look at all the documentation that's been provided, and they would make a ruling as to whether that case should go any further. They'd look at, in cases of a Section 21, had all the deregulation documents been provided? Were they correct? Was the tenant in receipt of everything that they should be in receipt of? There is a feeling that that's going to continue. And the reason for that is to try and reduce the waiting lists in court as much as is physically possible. It's worth remembering that through 2010 through to 2019, 50% of all of the courts in England and Wales were closed by the current government in an attempt to reduce spending. So waiting lists pre-COVID were already at an all-time high. Courts being closed through last year is going to have impacted that. It's going to have increased that waiting list. The government did announce last year, we've yet to see them, Nightingale courts. So like the Nightingale hospitals, the pop-up hospitals, they advised that it was their intention that to clear this waiting list, there would be Nightingale courts. That's something that's been put out there, but as of yet, we haven't sort of seen how that's going to come into play. Obviously, completely fresh news today with Robert Jenrick being removed as housing minister and replaced by Michael Gove. This is again, it's potential to all change as somebody fresh comes in with a fresh pair of eyes and is going to want to roll out their plans to level up the housing market as they put in the manifesto, and clear these logs. One of the big sort of changes for the last month is right to rent. Now, there's a reason. There's two reasons why we've seen a lot of change in right to rent legislation over the last month. COVID is one. There were plans to change this because of legislation that was out there due to COVID, but the other is Brexit. So through September, August, and July, there have been some changes. What was planned to come into play in September was that any right to rent document checks would have to be in person. So right to rent is a government legislation. It's legislation that landlords and letting agents have to adhere to. We have to carry out really stringent checks to ensure that anybody who is looking to rent a property within the UK has the legal right to do so. To do that, we ask for documentation. Most common is a passport, UK passport, or a passport showing a UK visa. Where we have tenants or applicants that don't have passports, we can look for sort of government documentation, so Home Office, DWP, Department of Work and Pension, local council, local authority, schools, doctors, that type of thing. There's a whole host of documents that can be used to prove this. Failing that, there are letters from acceptable people, so doctors, teachers, basically anybody who is classed as a professional can also provide documentation. So through COVID, these checks have gone from being in person to checks to being acceptable to carry out virtually. So prior to March last year, we'd have to see the original passport, the original visa or letter. We can now see a copy of that, and we can do a video call to check sort of likeness, facial likeness to a photograph. That was due to stop in the beginning of September. That's now been extended to the 5th of April 2022. And there is feeling that will lead to or allow time for the departments, the government departments, to look at more tech routes to go down. So taking away from needing to obtain copies of passports or paper, and this being completely online or app based. The change that came into play in July was what and who were classed as acceptable in terms of EU, EEA, and Swiss citizens. So obviously EU, EEA, Swiss citizens, they were allowed a period of grace from the Brexit sort of removal of the UK from the European Union. There was a grace period where EU citizens, EEA, and Swiss citizens were sort of still eligible under their sort of permitted rights. What that has now done, anybody who's applied for EU settlement status can still continue to rent within the UK so long as the application has been made. If the application hasn't been made, unfortunately, then we need to see other means, or it would be a breach of the right to rent legislation. There are a whole host of different ways to check somebody's sort of eligibility to have for right to rent. The two most common are physical immigration documents or Home Office online checking service. The Home Office online checking service is quite new. Not a lot of people have got access to this. We have come across it in a few cases, and it does work really, really well. So there is hope, sort of, certainly from myself. The route that the government go down is some way of rolling that out across everybody. It's worth pointing out that right to rent checks need to be carried out for everybody. There is no exception to this, regardless of anybody's sort of nationality or a place of birth. The checks need to be carried out. There are some situations where the documentation that you would check has a time limited period. So if a working visa may allow somebody 1 year, there would need to be follow-up retrospective checks carried out. If it's found that those retrospective checks that person doesn't have the right to rent within the UK, then the actions that would need to be taken by the landlord or the letting agent is a report to the Home Office. There is no requirement for a landlord or letting agent to seek to evict a tenant because they do not have the right to rent, if that right to rent has expired after the person moved into the properties. So there is a lot that comes in with right to rent. It's something that most landlords will not be too familiar with. They will probably find that it's carried out by their letting agent, whether that be a managed landlord, whether that be a landlord who instructs a letting agent on a sort of tenant find or find tenant only basis. You will find that this is something that's picked up by the letting agent. Landlords who are using Gumtree, spare room, things like that. It's really, really important that this is picked up. The fines are tens of thousands of pounds. It can have an impact on your ability to recover a property. It can have an impact on mortgages, insurance. It is to be taken seriously, and it does need to be part of your pre-let checks. So that's it for our topics today. When registering, we gave the opportunity for people to raise a question, to ask some questions, and then we did receive sort of a few on there. So we're just going to go through those and sort of see if we can provide some answers to those. So the first one, which is one that we come across a lot, I'm a first-time landlord looking to build a portfolio. Is there any advice that you can give? The short answer is yes, absolutely. Now, that advice can vary depending on your sort of searches, your personal circumstances, the amount of cash that you've got available, what your strategy is, rent to rent, whether it's looking to buy a property and hold it fully in cash, or leverage cash against the mortgage and hold more properties. The one thing that I would say is do your research. There are a lot of things to take into account now when you're becoming a landlord. It's not a sort of side hobby like it used to be. It does need to be taken seriously. The implications can be severe. Penalties are significant financial penalties or potentially imprisonment. Choosing a good letting agent, a good management agent, can take away most of, if not all of these requirements from you. But certainly do your research. If you're looking at buying a property, particularly off plan, we come across a lot of opportunities, and a lot of opportunities that we knock back because there may be issues with planning permission. We may not be able to see developer funding. The developer may not have a proven track record. So we do carry out stringent checks on the properties that make it to our books. So if you are a first-time landlord, do your research and make sure you know what you are looking for, and have a really clear idea of what your strategy is and what your sort of gold mine area is. What areas are you looking to invest in and why? Like I said at the beginning, if you want any further advice, if it's you that's asked this question, top of the page, book a follow-up call with Christian McClory. He's our business development manager, completely free of charge and tie, and we'll be happy to provide you with some information to make sure that you are making these decisions. Second question for those that are on the webinar, this has been answered prior to the webinar as well. Yes, the webinar has been recorded and will be sent to anybody who registered for you to watch at your leisure and to review if you weren't able to make this. And then we've got a number of landlords over in Hong Kong who've registered and are going to be watching sort of on replay afterwards. Third question, I had me stumped and I had to go back and have a look and take some advice, and we're still not completely sure of the answer. Once the eviction judgment has been delivered, can the court revert its decision? 99.9% sure that the answer to this is no. The only way that we feel that this can be done is if new evidence comes to light. What type of evidence? Completely unaware of, never come across it. The people that we've asked have never come across it. So I'm fairly certain that the answer to this is no. If a judge makes a ruling, that is it. But I've never come across it. So fairly certain, the court cannot revert its decision. How can I generate traffic to my property? Like we touched on earlier on, the market's buoyant. There shouldn't really be a reason for a property sort of sitting at the moment. If it is, it's probably price point or appeal. Now, there can be other reasons. We do come across and we do have situations where we've launched a lot of properties in one area at a specific time, in one development at a specific time. If a developer builds out and releases two phases in one go, clearly putting 80 properties on the market, varying styles, sizes, rental expectations, furnishing options, is going to have an impact. So we do find sometimes that the exception to this rule can be if a lot of properties have released in one area at a given point. But if you are experiencing a lack of traffic to your property at the moment, speak to us, give us a call. We'll see how we can help. We registered more applicants through the last 4 weeks than we have done in any 4-week period over the last 5 years. We came into 81 inquiries on one property over a weekend once. So, the market is buoyant and strong, and we're more than happy to help with marketing a property in any way that we can. Like we said before, we cover the entirety of the UK, so we have a really good viewpoint on what's going on. Sort of last two, and these are probably a little bit more sort of specific, and these are ones where if this is yourself that's asked this question, I'd sort of say book that call with Christian. He'll be able to speak to you in more detail. So the property market, Leeds and Manchester, extremely strong. Like we said before, Leeds is up 1.4% in terms of rental growth, Manchester 1.8%. They are lagging a little bit behind sort of Liverpool, Birmingham, Nottingham and Derby. They are sort of larger cities, but we are seeing that sort of pendulum swing and an acceleration now in how quickly we're seeing properties let. They're great areas to invest in. There's demand from tenants of all types, working professionals, students, families. There's a number of demographics that we market properties to. So if you're looking to invest in one of these areas, they're really, really good. And we have got opportunities in those areas at the moment that we'd be delighted to speak to you about. If you've seen something online with another agent and you're after a second opinion, book that call with Christian. Reach out to myself. We'll give you an honest opinion as to what type of tenant you're going to expect and what type of rental expectation you may have. More information regarding tenants not paying the agreed rent and irregular payments from a tenant. This is one where it's really, really difficult without knowing sort of individual circumstances. With rental arrears at any given point, anytime, speak to your tenant, be open, try and encourage a two-way conversation. It's not going to be in anybody's best interest to your first sort of conversation with your tenant being forceful, blunt, or to the point. Show a little bit of empathy, show a little bit of sympathy. Make sure your tenant's aware that you're there to help. It's not in anybody's interest to go to court, particularly at the moment with the waiting times. If you can come to a resolution that sees a tenant paying rent, clearing arrears in bite-sized payments, setting up a payment plan, it's absolutely the way to go. Irregular payments are a bugbear of mine, particularly because it is what do you do? We can appreciate landlords and people and have to make a decision based on their individual circumstances. So if you're a landlord and you've got a mortgage payment due out on the 15th and your tenant's not paying until the 18th every month, I appreciate it can be inconvenient. Would you want to go to the lengths of evicting that tenant because of that? Probably not. Speak to the tenant, find out what it is, show them why it's important to you that you are keen for rents to be paid on a certain day. It may be that their circumstances have changed. If they've changed jobs where they've gone from being paid on the 1st to the 15th, maybe the reason. Can you speak to your mortgage company and move your payment date? Communication's key in any of these situations at all times. So that's it for today. I know our initial agenda was supposed to be for an hour. Like we said at the beginning, this is the first webinar that we've done, so there is a little bit of trial and error goes into how long we keep this down to. We want to keep it long enough that you're getting maximum return for your time, but short enough that it's engaging and you feel it's worthwhile. We will be doing this on a more regular basis. So we will be doing this on a month by month basis. If there's any topics that you would like to see covered, then please do let us know when we send the next invites out. If you have any questions that you want more details for, press the link at the top of the page, have a chat to Christian. We're here to help. We're more than happy to help with any questions that you may have. Check out our social media pages, like, subscribe. Our marketing team are always pushing out the latest topics on there, and you will be sure to find the next announcement on October's webinar, the topics that we're going to be covering and the date that it's going to be on there now. So thanks very much for joining us today. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this beneficial, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you again next month. Thanks very much.